Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Banyen Books podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and I'm really happy that we're joined today by Valerie Mason-John, or Vimalasara. Dr. Valerie Mason-John, also known as Vimalasara, is a public speaker and master trainer in the field of conflict transformation, leadership, and mindfulness. They're also an author, poet, and playwright. Vimalasara was featured at TEDx Renfrew Collingwood, where they gave a talk titled, "We Are What We Think," which outlined a course of action we can take to work on the global epidemic of bullying, and has had over 300,000 hits online. Vimalasara is an accredited life coach and addictions coach. They're also one of the founding facilitators of Dr. Gabor Mate's Compassionate Inquiry course. They're trained in both compassionate inquiry and internal family systems, and work as a mindfulness coach to help liberate people from the prison of their minds. Vimalasara is also ordained into the Triratna community and has been practicing Buddhism for over 30 years. They're the co-founder of 8-Step Recovery, an alternative to the 12-Step program for addiction, and also the co-founder of the accredited program Mindfulness-Based Addiction Recovery, which is a cousin of mindfulness-based relapse prevention. Vimalasara is an award-winning author and editor of 10 books, including 8-Step Recovery and Detox Your Heart. This year, their book, I Am Still Your Negro, an homage to James Baldwin, was shortlisted for both the Dorothy Livesay and Gerald Lampert Awards. Today, Vimalasara is with Banyen Books in conversation about the release of a book for which they are the editor and a contributing writer. The book is titled Afrikan Wisdom: New Voices Talk Black Liberation, Buddhism, and Beyond. A bit about the book. It's a spiritual, political, and interdisciplinary anthology of wisdom stories from Black liberation leaders and teachers. Afrikan Wisdom represents an intersectional, cross-pollinated exploration of Black life, past, present, and future. A collection of 34 essays written by an eclectic and inspirational group of Black thought leaders and teachers reflects on the unique and multi-layered experience of being Black in the world today. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, please visit their website. It's valerieMason-John.com. Banyen community, please join me in a warm welcome for Vimalasara. Vimalasara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Just that long introduction. And I'm really looking forward to this evening. I just want to say to our listeners that I really know that Ross has read the book from back to back. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation. And I just also want to say that the contributors are from Canada, the UK, and the US. And that was very important for me because I straddle those three countries.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a fantastic book. And for me, it was really illuminating and rich to dive into all of these different perspectives. So I'm encouraging everyone to please get a copy of this book and check it out. Now, maybe you can fill us in on what happened in 2019 at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in California.
Yeah, before I do that, I wanted to, we spoke about that playing because
Yes.
the what's called the Negro National Anthem, and I thought it would be really great to play that first, to begin that. So I just wanted to say that the Negro National Anthem is called Lift Every Voice, and it was written by James Weldon Johnson, and his brother in 1899 put it to music. So I'm just gonna play that now. Let me just see, so hopefully. Okay.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, the listening skies, let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Victory is won. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Bless our feet, straight from the places, our God, where we met Thee. Bless our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadow beneath Thy hand, ever stand. True to our God, true to our God, true to our God, true to our God, true to our native land.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So you were asking me to speak about the event that brought this seed of this book into being.
Yeah.
Yes, 2019. It was the synchronicity of that happening, and then the pandemic happening soon after, and I'll say why. It's so in 2019 it would be the second gathering, the very first gathering of African descent Dharma teachers had happened a couple of years before. I couldn't actually go to that. I was busy traveling, but it was a much smaller group, and out of that, it was decided, let's try and bring at least 100 African descent Dharma teachers together at Spirit Rock. And what it meant was that none of us had to pay for our travel. None of us had to even pay to stay at Spirit Rock. All the money was raised. And we were greeted by Alice Walker. And so we had time with Alice Walker at the beginning of at the beginning of the retreat. And then at the end of the retreat, we had Angela Davis and Jan Willis. And what actually happened at the end of the retreat, the last 3 days, we opened it up to African descent practitioners. And so, you know, from 100, we went to perhaps 300, 400 people at Spirit Rock. So it was an amazing event. And the event was amazing is because it brought collaborations together, and it brought teachers who had been working in silos, hadn't had that connection, teachers who are working like myself in the context of predominantly white Sanghas, and brought us together to do things. And so when I was there, there were a couple of presentations, and I just thought, wow, this is so amazing. And then there was the younger voice, the younger generation saying, how can we be published? And I was actually in conversation with North Atlantic Press about something else. And I just thought, you know what? I'm in a position to be able to uplift these voices, uplift these new voices, and let me take this to North Atlantic Press, because I was so inspired by Justin Miles's piece and also Seho's piece. And those were the two pieces, actually, that was the nexus of the anthology. And Seho's piece was very much looking at a 12-step approach to unconscious bias. It was a very, a very smart way of using the 12 steps to unpack unconscious bias. And Justin Miles' piece was a very traditional Buddhist piece of devotion, of devotional acts. And then I want to say that the book wasn't just about Buddhist writers writing. I think initially I had thought about, let's bring Buddhist voices together. And it's like, no, that what was very clear at this conference was that our Buddhist practice doesn't stay within the confinements of what traditionally is called Dharma, that our Dharma includes social justice issues, that our, you know, when I think of our Dharma and we think of the three poisons, we talk about the three poisons of Buddhism, greed, hatred, and delusion. And people like Martin Luther King renamed these three poisons as militarism, poverty, and racism. And so in a way, it was very important to open up the aperture of what Dharma means for us as African descent practitioners. And then the reason why I say that it just happening before the pandemic, because we'd all come together. We wouldn't have known each other. And so during that pandemic, we were able to come together online and actually begin to do stuff and create these sanghas online. And so some beautiful things have come out of it. And in fact, I'm working on a project which a project of developing a BIPOC mindfulness course by BIPOC people for BIPOC people. And, you know, two of us who led on that, who came up with that idea, it's much bigger than us, you know, came out of this gathering. And so there was just so much wisdom in that gathering of bringing us together. And as I say, you know, we were hosted by Alice Walker and Angela Davis, which actually looks at who are some of our Dharma teachers. Yeah.
That's wonderful. You know, a few things you said there reminded me of a quote from the book. So I'm going to go to that. It's from the essay by Anouk Amy Shambrook called Coming Home to Embodied Non-Duality. And in that they write, As Black people, we often grapple with additional obstacles to coming back to our true nature. The trauma of the relentless rejection of our humanity and the denial of our reality can make us feel under attack. We often lack an embodied sense of safety, making relaxation, trust, and openness feel counterintuitive. The collective history of trauma that our bodies carry, we may not trust that oneness is our true nature and birthright. So I'm wondering, because you spoke about Black and BIPOC dedicated sanghas, and I'm wondering if you can speak to the need for that and this felt lack of safety for many Black people that might be in predominantly white sanghas.
Well, you know, one of the ways I can speak to that is that pre-pandemic, if Black or BIPOC, or in the UK they say BAPOC, they put the Asian in BAPOC, and especially, you know, really talking about African descent, that for many of us pre-pandemic, if we wanted to go to a Sangha night, we would, you know, are we going to get home safely? You know, are we going to get there safely? Are we going to be stopped by the police? And so with the pandemic happening and everything happening online, no longer did we have to worry about, are we going to get home safely? Or, you know, is our partner going to get home safely? And that is a real issue. And what I want to say is, I mean, actually in terms, you know, I just really want to take a moment to really talk to the atrocity of the gun crimes that happens in the US. Yeah. And so for many people, it could be very difficult to be in the body. Yeah. And that includes all of us. And those of us who are African descent or who are BIPOC, we are also on top of that singled out. Yeah, we're singled out. So yeah, on that collective trauma we have, you know, if you're living in the US, there's that collective trauma. Oh my God, you know, will my kid be safe at school? Oh my God, you know, will we be safe going into the shopping center? And especially those of us who are African descent Latinx, it's like, I would say that many African descent males and many Latinx or has Hispanic males believe that they won't live beyond 30. Yeah. And there's a reason why they believe they won't live beyond 30, because of how we are policed, you know, how we're policed in the world, and not just in the US. I grew up in the UK, and we are policed in a very similar way. The only difference is that we just don't have the same access to guns. We have the access to knives, and not the same access to guns. So what's really important, I think, to have BIPOC sanghas or even African descent sanghas or specifically Asian sanghas, I think it's important is because if we go into centers like Spirit Rock or even my centers like Triratna, the Dharma is very, very much packaged through a Western lens, okay? So what we have to remember is that the Buddhism was brought to the West by Asian people. Okay, we have to remember that Buddhism wasn't brought to the West by people like Sharon, as much as I love her, and Jack Cornfield, as much as I love him, etc. It was brought by Asian people in 1800s. Okay, and those Buddhist temples are very, very strong, and there are many people who grow up perhaps culturally being Buddhist, and then there's a whole generation of perhaps of Asian people who didn't grow up Buddhist and are looking for something and maybe don't want to go to their, and I would say ethnic temple. They might want something which is slightly different, and what they're going to get is it's something which is through a white Western lens. So if we are able to come together as a BIPOC community or as an African descent community, we can begin to translate the Dharma through our experience, because the Dharma it's a living truth. You know, if you think like the Dharma in India, and then it goes to Burma, look how different it is in India to Burma. Look how different the Dharma is from Burma to Tibet. Look how different the Dharma is from Tibet to China. It's not like the teachings are thrown out, but how people live the Dharma is very different because you experience it through your cultural lens. And so what's happened is here in the West, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, the Dharma, which has become popular, a lot of that has been packaged through the white Western lens, and it's time we as BIPOC and BAPOC people begin to translate the Dharma through our experiencing, through our lens, and to know that, yes, that is okay, that we can go into a Dharma hall, and when we're talking about the Four Noble Truths, we need to include the suffering of actually anti-Asian oppression, anti-Black oppression, anti-Hispanic oppression. We need to be able to talk about that. So it's really important that we have those spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the essays in section one is titled Reappropriating the Buddha, and the first essay by Shaka Kalpani presents the historical evidence that India's first people were Black, and that Gautama Buddha himself was Black. I'm just wondering if you have any comments yourself on this point of view that Buddha was a Black man.
I love it. I remember friends saying, wow, you know, that's the first one that we're going to lead with. And I said, yep. And in a way, it's like, I go with, if I'm in the UK and I go to Buddhist centers there, the Buddha is white, okay? It's like one of the most recent Buddhist centers that's been built in my tradition, Vajrasana, basically the Buddha, the Rupa, is this white dude. Do you know what I mean? So in a way, what we do is we often project our experience onto the Buddha, which is why people project male onto the Buddha, people project man onto the Buddha. And yet, when somebody becomes woke, when somebody becomes awake, basically all those labels that identify us as through our gender or our race have been destroyed, have been dismantled, and we are genderless, yeah. And yet, for our experiences, we will project male, we will project white, etc. So coming back to your question, I think in that chapter, it's a bit more complex than that, because it is actually looking at the migration of Africans into India, which has a long history. And actually, why not? You know, many Indian people are as Black as me and Blacker. You know, are they brown? You know, why not? You know, we quite honestly, if the Buddha was a wanderer, he couldn't have been pale skinned. He would have been weather beaten. And why? You know, it's possible. Why not? You know, I mean, there are many dark-skinned people in India, and not all dark-skinned people are of the lower caste. I think often because of the Varna system in India, that people always assume that the darker you are and the lower caste you will be. And often that happens, and there are very high caste dark Indians who are Brahmins, yeah. And we know that the Buddha was from the Brahmin caste and was very political. I mean, again, that's what I want to say is that actually it's almost like the Dharma expressed through the Western lens. We have to take out the politics, and yet there was always politics in the Dharma.
Yeah, it seems entirely plausible to me, especially like if we look at the hypothesis that everybody comes out of Africa, then India would have been you know, one of the early places that people would have gone. So there's, it makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you something. I've heard you in another panel discussion, you described yourself as stateless Indigenous. I'm wondering if you can tell us what that means to you and maybe to other people of the African diaspora.
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, writing has been very much my through line, and my first job, it wasn't my first full-time job. I worked as an international correspondent, and one of the places I lived out in was Australia for a couple of years, and I covered Aboriginal deaths in custody and Aboriginal land rights. And I had the privilege to live traditionally. If you know Australia, there's these two tips, and I lived right in Arnhem Land, where only the elders had contact with white people, and so I could only communicate with the elders. And there were two things. There were I think two things, maybe three things. The first one, actually, I would say is, no, let me start with when I met them. When I first came, they called me, I was a pale Black person. I'd never been called pale before, but they could see that I hadn't had the sun, didn't have enough melanin in me. One of the questions they asked me very off the bat was, where was I Indigenous to? I was 25 when I went out there. Indigenous, you know, I'd grown up in England. I never thought about Indigenous. The only thing I knew is like being told to go back home to where you come from. That was the only thing I knew. So Indigenous, it was a new word because it just wasn't part of the vernacular or the vocabulary. It still isn't in the UK. They still struggle over BIPOC, which is why they put the A in as BAPOC, because in England, people just don't know who is Indigenous to there. So for me, it set me on a road of discovery. What did it mean to be Indigenous? And of course, I realized I'm of slave stock. I have absolutely no idea where I descend from, where I hail from. Okay, or I can do ancestry.com. But my people, I'm of Sierra Leone descent, and as you know, we're both in Canada. Nova Scotia has that strong history with Sierra Leone, where it sent the Black loyalists, the free Black loyalists, back to Sierra Leone, where the Black loyalists and the Black poor, what they were called, who was sent back to Sierra Leone, established Freetown. Okay, so Freetown was developed by the slaves, by the enslaved, the free enslaved people. So I'm from that. I'm from those people. So we would have been taken from all over Africa, shipped out all over the world. And then when we got freedom, people went back there. So I know I'm Indigenous to Africa, but where am I Indigenous to? And so that's why I say I'm a stateless Indigenous person. And I think that's really important. Yeah. And then I wanted to say, I said there were three things. That it was a very pivotal time for me, actually, being out in Australia, living traditionally amongst the Yolngu. They taught me so much. One of the things was tiger balm, and I slept under a tree. My bedroom was under a tree, and every day I couldn't find my little jar of tiger balm. And it was after a week I realized that, oh, my tree is a cupboard, because somebody had put it back in the same branch every time. So just learning to actually think out of the box. And then the other piece of wisdom that I got from that experience was I spent a lot of time sitting around the fire. It would just be one log, one log, not all these twigs and building it up as you do. It's just one log that would burn for the whole night, and you would sleep around it. And it was always taught, never look into the fire, always look beyond it, because it would send you crazy. And for me, that's a real teaching. Never look right into the mind, always look beyond the thoughts, because if you look into the mind, into the thoughts, they will send you crazy. Always remember to see beyond. So yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's really cool. Now there's a term, Sankofa. Can you tell us what that means?
So yes, Sankofa is a term, is to return, to return and bring back, and to return back to the motherland and gather up what it is that we haven't taken. And in a way, when you think, when we were captured and enslaved, how could we take what we needed? The only thing we could take was this body. Yeah. And so the Sankofa is about the return, to return and to collect and gather and bring back.
Mm-hmm. When I heard that term, I was struck by how important that might be to white people too. This idea that, you know, a lot of our trauma and the reasons we've perpetuated what we have is because of our disconnection from our indigeneity. I'm wondering if you can comment, do you think this is an important, this idea of Sankofa, of going back and taking back, you know, a piece that we may have lost, is important?
I think, I think, yes, I think what's important is that every single one of us is indigenous to somewhere. Yeah, this is what we have to remember, that we are all indigenous to somewhere, and for us to honor that, and if we are able to discover where it is that we are indigenous to, and to have gratitude for those indigenous cultures that still survive. You know, that's just so important. For me, it's when I was in Australia, I was just so aware how my status as a Black person changed. I was no longer at the bottom. Indigenous people were at the bottom, and the rights of those Indigenous people was so important. And that's the same in Canada. Again, that how my status as a Black person changes, and the Indigenous people are at the bottom. In fact, I always say that Black people are missed. You know, it's that people aren't concerned about that. But what I want to say is it's the uprising of Indigenous people. I just think, wow, you know, at some point, you know, I hope the Indigenous people of Canada get their land back. And what would that mean? You know, we have colonizers have stolen so much, not just our land, stolen our languages, yeah, stolen our rituals. You know, this thing of appropriation, so much has been taken away from us. So in answer to your question, it is really important for us to discover where we are indigenous to, and to learn the wisdom of our people. And we will find that actually there are many similarities. One of the amazing things that I had during that time of living out in Australia for those couple of years, they used to have this Pacific gathering, this Pacific conference, was just amazing. People would come from all over the Pacific with their indigenous instruments. And then you would, you know, it's like, oh my God, so many things that you would think like Morris dancing, which is Moorish dancing, which, you know, in England, you think, oh, this is a white tradition, but actually that comes from the Moors, and the Moors came from all over Africa. You know, and then these instruments that we play, and we're introduced as these are Western instruments, and then you see the wisdom of these indigenous people who bring these huge instruments, and what we've done in the West is just made them smaller so that we can appropriate them and keep them in our pocket. So in answer to your question, it is really important, the return, and the really important for us to connect to our indigeneity.
Thank you. I really liked your interview with the essay you wrote. It's titled, it's not an essay, it's an interview with an African elder priestess, and her name was Mama Ya. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your experience in meeting her and what she was like.
Oh, she is amazing, and it's made me think I should reach out to her. One of the things I will remember, I met Mama Ya because I had I went on the first and only, it will be the first and only because Malidoma Somé has passed.
Yeah.
So I went on the first and only Malidoma Somé gathering of African descent people of ancestralization. And that's where I met Mama Ya. We shared a room. There was about 4 or 5 of us who shared a room. And just her wisdom, it was just to be in the presence of her wisdom. And one of the things I always remember is she taught me what you do with spirits. That's alcohol, what you do with spirits. You don't drink spirits because they're so strong. What you do is you welcome the spirit, you pour it on the ground and you rub it in your head. Yeah, that's where you put it. To put spirits inside you will just wreck the body. And that was just something that she really taught me in terms of calling in the ancestors and how we use the spirits. And she brought her big bottle of, I can't remember if it was whiskey or something, but it wasn't to drink. It was to welcome the ancestors and to protect us from the spirits. Yeah. And so you don't drink it, you rub it in your head or you pour it on the ground. You have to, as you say, it's a beautiful interview, and one has to read that interview. Yeah.
You mentioned Malidoma Somé, and he passed on back in December 2021. He was a good friend of Banyen Books, and we hosted him. I had the honor of hosting him one time. Might have been one of his last events that he did with Banyen. I'm just wondering if you could comment on what kind of man he was and the work that he did in the world.
Basically, I think for me, I resonate with Malidoma because he was stolen, and he went to boarding school and was raised by the priest and was raised in that white context. And at some point he had to do his Sankofa and go back and to get his culture and to get his tradition and wisdom. And he did, and then kind of shared it with the world. And actually really, one of the things about Malidoma is that he shared those gifts, not just with African descent people, because as I say, we were the first and only ancestralization gathering that he did. But what I would say about Malidoma is that he was had a lot of wisdom, and just was really had a seeing, was able to see into this world through a different dimension. And taught you to really, there's that way of seeing where we can just see on that literal level, or we could say you can see on that metaphorical level, but he was able to see beyond that and see into the world through an alchemical lens, and was able to pass his knowledge on to people who can continue to take it out into the world. I'm not one of those people that went on retreat, but one of the people who contributed to the book, Hosmore, is one of his elders who is continuing the work of Malidoma. And I think his books have been so much solace for many, many people. I think in a way, what Malidoma has done for many people was really to bring African wisdom into the mainstream. Because before then, I can think really Ben Okri, Famish Road. If you think of that, I loved Ben's book, Famish Road. And that was really, I think, really quite pivotal when that came out, really, because there was no compromise of talking about African spirituality, African wisdom. But then here you had Malidoma really bringing the Dagra practice into the West.
Thank you. Your essay, "When Will We Sing, Dance, Tell Our Stories, Dwell in Silence, and Begin Breathing Again?" There's a part that just, I had to share it, and it's a little bit of a long quote, but I'm just hoping it'll open a doorway to something we can discuss. You write, "The transatlantic theft of African people, the Mafa African Holocaust, and the Holocaust of enslavement took away our song, our dance, our stories, our silence, our breath. We couldn't even beg for our breath, our life force lynched from the moment the white colonizer came and conducted such atrocities and genocide on the continent of Africa." And then you go on to say, "In Africa, when someone is spiritually, mentally, and or physically sick, it is said that the healers will ask 4 questions. The 4 questions, this is just so beautiful. When did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? When did you stop being enchanted by your own stories? When did you stop dwelling in the sweet territory of silence?" And you add a 5th question. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I'm saying, did I write that? I don't write the books. The spirit, an ancestor, I really do believe that none of us really have copyright over this, that actually it's ancestors moving through all of us. Yeah, and definitely that was I'm thinking, did I write that? No, I didn't write that, ancestor. So being that vessel for the ancestor. And I just want to say that there is a debate. I first learned about those teachings from a very good friend and colleague of mine, Carol Cano, who sometimes it's sourced to Latin America, and I can't think of the person's name at the moment. And then when I did research onto the internet, it was like, oh, these questions are in African culture too. So, and again, that thing of being a shaman and just how similar, you know, as humans, when we really when we touch into authentic self, or when we touch into that deluded self, we're very similar in the way that we might approach things. And so for me, I added the extra question as a Dharma practitioner, and because I know for me, definitely we lose the breath. When did we stop breathing? Yeah, it's like the restriction of the breath. So many people do not allow themselves to breathe fully. And why don't they allow themselves to breathe fully? Because they learn to hold on to the breath due to trauma. And so again, yeah, when did we stop breathing? Yeah. So for me, it was a very significant, all those questions are very significant. Yeah.
Thank you. There's some really nice questions here. I just want to thank the audience so far, the people that have submitted questions. This one is from Sista Zai Zanda, who says, Yolgnu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Yolgnu, I live in the southeast on Kulin Nations and migrated here from Zimbabwe. It's here that I began to think of Africans as indigenous, with privilege vis-a-vis Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. What does indigenous mean to you? What is the significance of quote unquote indigenous for you? And I know we covered that a little bit, but I wanted to get to this question too.
Yeah. Yeah, Torres Strait, I'm feeling a bit, yeah, gosh. One doesn't even think of Torres Strait Island when you're over here. That was one of the big griefs of coming back over to the UK, then when I was in the UK, and just losing just the beauty of the Pacific. What does indigenous mean to me? Well, in indigenous, it's interesting because we could say that, or I could say that indigenous is the first people of the land, but it's more than that, because actually I think, you know, how can we attest to who was exactly the first people of the land? And if we think of the first people of the land, then we have to think of the four-legged, you know, and we have to think of the plants, because for me they are beings and breathing beings. And today I think indigenous are, for me, are those people who still hold the secret teachings and the wisdoms. Yeah, that definitely here in Canada, when I had the privilege to be able to be around the indigenous community, they hold that there has been wisdom that has been passed down into those communities, and they might not necessarily live the wisdom, but yet they are the keepers of the wisdom, and they remind us that actually there were people on this land before we adulterated it, you know, before we appropriated it. And for me, indigenous people teach us how to be custodians of the land. If we were to listen to the indigenous people, would we be suffering from climate change right now? No, because the way indigenous people live is very different from the way I live. Yeah, there's such, I'm adopted into an indigenous family in Lillooet, and the way they live, it's like they go out fishing, but it's not for them, it's for the whole community. They go picking mushrooms or berries and you know, fruits and vegetables and jar it, but it's not for them, it's for the whole community. And if I, you know, if I was to eat fish or meat, I would never have to buy it, because they want to send me home with this fish, salmon, this meat, whatever, because it's to be shared. It isn't to be kept, that you just take what you need and leave the rest. And that is something that we as colonizers, we have got so greedy and we take more than what we need. So what does it mean to be indigenous? I don't know what it means to be indigenous, because as I say, I'm stateless. What I do know is that when I stepped off the plane from England in Sierra Leone, and people said, welcome back, when I passed security, there was something. And when I saw my people, and I saw like, oh my God, that's my body, there was something in that, because I just don't see that here in the places that I've lived, and yet they're not indigenous, they're Creoles. So for me, the significance of indigenous for me is to remember the land. That's what indigenous people teach me, is to remember the land, to remember the four-legged, to remember the plants. That for me is the significance for us, that we are supposed to be custodians of the land. That's the significance for me.
Thank you. There's a question here from Marie, who says, why is there little talk about Haiti, how it has been unseen by even the African descendants living in the diaspora, how it has been vilified or ignored even in spiritual circles, and why among other religions, Vodou is hardly even ever listed?
Badun, yeah, thank you. Actually, if I could put the link, I just co-produced the African Wisdom Summit, and Haiti was very much featured. As we know, Haiti was the first and only really successful slave revolt that we know of. And also knowing that actually Haiti is still being punished for that. So what I would say is, most definitely, I have not excluded Haiti. So if you just Google African Wisdom Summit, you could actually I think now, because it's over, you would have to buy to buy those there's 34 talks, and Haiti is one of them, looking at the wisdom in the African diaspora. I think that if we're talking about Verdun, is that people are very scared of what they perceive to be Verdun, and in terms of, you know, is it voodoo? Is it animal sacrifice? Is it, I mean, that's again with Malidoma Somé. So I think that the West, the West is frightened by some of those traditional religions, and even us as African descent people can also be frightened of some of those traditional religions. So that's what I would say, that definitely there things like Verdun and voodoo has definitely been stigmatized. And what people have done is, I think what white Westerners have done, it's almost like what they did to belly dancing, which was a whole, you know, what we know that belly dancing was this beautiful birthing dance. Rakshaki was this beautiful birthing dance which was performed for women. Men as guests were able to come in and see it, and then what they did was they extracted certain parts for it and then made it this sexualized thing. And I think, you know, Westerners have done the same. They've taken something from Verdun which is completely out of context and made it this in inverted commas what can be seen as a scary thing. So that's my response to that, and to say really check out the African Wisdom Summit, because it is a fantastic conversation that I have with Max Gaston on Haiti.
Wonderful. So if people Google African Wisdom Summit, that'll come up right away, will it?
Yes, it should do. Yeah.
Links there for everyone here live. If you're watching or listening to the recording, it's African with a K for African, wisdomsummit.com. I just want to take a moment in this pause to thank Jacob Steele, our producer and events curator. He makes all of these events possible and brings in all of our wonderful guests, people like Vimala Sara, who's here with us today. So big thanks to Jacob, and a big thanks to our live audience for making these events so wonderful. We've been talking to Vimala Sara about her book, which is called African Wisdom: New Voices Talk Black Liberation, Buddhism, and Beyond. And we've got a few more minutes, and there's a couple more audience questions here. This one is from Dingani, who says, "This is amazing, Miss Vimala Sara. As a Zulu, ancestors is where I live. I cannot even begin to comment on your reflection on ancestral wisdom. You are a gift to all of us. My question is Sankofa similar to decolonization?"
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and a difficult question to answer. I've been in spaces with BIPOC people really talking about what is actually decolonization, what are we actually really decolonizing, and actually really trying to move away from that expression of decolonizing and actually just reclaiming what is ours. I tend to come at it from another perspective of beginning to make things more culturally specific to us. I would say that, you know, definitely the word Sankofa is an African word. It's a word that came from Ghana. I think it's the Akan tribe that it came from Ghana. And, you know, its literal translation, well, there's so many actually different variations, but reminding us it's not taboo to perfect what is at risk of being left behind. And so in a way, I would say, don't compare, because decolonization is a Western is a Western concept, and actually Sankofa comes from through an African lens. So that's what I would say, is not to try and compare the two, but actually just really see it through the lens of Sankofa, through an African concept rather than through a Western concept. And you can always get hold of me through my website,
which is ValerieMason-John.com, right?
Yeah.
We'll get to one more audience question here. This is from Hoda, and it's a simple question, but I'm very curious about this too. Hoda says, curious why you spell Africa as Africa with a K.
Africa with a K, because in traditional African languages, it was a K, and Africa with a C is a westernized spelling. Yeah, so it's reclaiming it. And then, there are debates, it's a political way of reclaiming Africa, but actually in many African languages, we didn't have a C. We had a K, which is why we spell it in its more indigenous form. Yeah. I just really want to say that this book really is it's a gift from the contributors. We are future ancestors. Okay, every one of us here is a future ancestor, and I have the privilege of standing on the shoulders of the ancestors that have come before me. I get to be able to live as an African descent person in this world with a level of freedom. But I still don't have all the freedom that it's still a human rights issue around the freedom that we as African descent people do not have. And so, this book is a legacy. It's something leaving there for those who come after us in the West, really, because so much has been lost. So much has been lost through the Mayafa, through the mass incarceration. We're still experiencing mass incarceration. Whether you go to Canada, whether you go to the US, whether you go to England, and I'm sure other places in Europe, African descent people are the most incarcerated, whether they be in mental health institutions, whether they be in prisons. Even in Canada, if you look at the percentage of African descent people in this country, we are still more incarcerated than Indigenous people. In numbers, there's more Indigenous people incarcerated, but if you look at the percentage of how small the population is here and the percentage, we are still more incarcerated because we're so much more visible.
Thank you, Vimla Sara, for this really wonderful book, and for all the work that you're doing, and for giving your time to speak with us today. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. Thank you, Ross. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for all of you who stayed for the conversation. Thank you. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, is there just going to be 3 people in the audience and you're just doing it for the recording? So thank you, and thank you all for your questions. Apologies that we didn't get to all of your questions. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. And I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.